famous UFO sighting in 1964 in Socorro, New Mexico by a policeman is very similar to the craft witnessed by US Army whistleblower JP in 2016. Azerbaijan becomes the 15th signatory to the China International Lunar Research Project. Stephen Ben-Nur talks about the Hamas attacks on Israel, and feedback from a Galactic Federation High Commander corroborates the assessment. Non-human beings continue to be seen in Peru and are abducting people. Ross Coulhart is correct about the consciousness UFO link and how it's essential for people to have the right DNA to be able to access UFO craft.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome to Exopolitics Today. This is Saturday, October 14, that you're getting this pre-record, where I cover the news, the exopolitics news that I thought was most noteworthy for the preceding week. And so the week started off on October 7 in terms of something that I thought was pretty relevant to the exopolitics research that I've been doing. And that is that there was a post by an individual on Twitter concerning the famous 1964 Socorro UFO landing that involved a policeman, Lonnie Zamora. And so here you have the craft that was seen, and this is an illustration of the craft that was witnessed in 1964. So you have kind of like an egg-shaped spheroid craft that lands and three legs, protuberances coming out. And this was what was witnessed by a policeman. And this was the craft witnessed by JP, who I've written about in two books now, US Army Insider Missions and Insider Missions 2. And in this craft, again, you have this kind of egg-shaped craft landing. And the interesting thing about this particular incident in 2016, which is when JP says that he witnessed this craft, is that he went inside it. And he went inside it and he said he saw this individual who looked Indian, that is the subcontinent Indian, and that this individual talked to JP and said that he actually was born and raised on the moon, but that he's human. And so this was someone who is part of a human lunar colony on the moon. So we're talking about a colony. I mean, this incident happened in 2016. So this individual was probably born somewhere in that time around 1990, somewhere in that period. And that kind of matches claims of lunar colonies having been established going all the way back even to the Second World War period. So very interesting that JP says that he went inside this craft and was piloted by someone, an Air Force pilot, a US Air Force pilot, but not wearing normal US Air Force insignia and uniform, but wearing a uniform that JP thought was similar to what is worn by US Air Force pilots. So that was very interesting, that particular incident. Here is a story, an interview I did with a very famous Roswell UFO crash researcher, Don Schmidt, who has written some of the first books on Roswell, certainly the most well-regarded books on the Roswell phenomenon. He's interviewed hundreds of whistleblowers or people that were witnesses to the UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico. And he is also an expert on the location to where the craft were taken which is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In 1947, there was no Area 51. Area 51 was built or was developed in the 1950s, in the mid-1950s by the CIA with the support of the Department of Energy and the US Navy. But in the 1940s, all foreign technologies that were of kind of like exceptional developmental interest, whether we're talking about crashed flying saucers that were extraterrestrial in origin, or whether we're talking about Nazi flying saucer craft, these were all taken initially to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it was only in the kind of latter part of the 1950s when the S4 facility at Area 51 was built that the craft were relocated from Wright-Patterson, where the initial research and development for the US Air Force took place. And then they would hand that off to the CIA, to the Department of Energy for storage at the Area 51 facility and for further study. But certainly the Air Force has had its own reverse or research and development program taking place at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And Don Schmidt is one of the primary researchers that has dug up a lot of evidence that these foreign technologies were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In 1947, it was renamed Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Prior to that, it was known as Wright Field. So this is where all of the advanced technology was taken. So Don Schmidt definitely is very knowledgeable about the Roswell crash and the location where the debris was taken and the reverse engineering that took place there. As far as the question, I asked him the question, do you think the reverse engineering was successful or not? He takes the position that Colonel Philip Corso, who wrote The Day After Roswell in 1996, that was substantially correct, that some of these technologies were successfully reverse engineered. So definitely an interview worth listening to for a Roswell expert. Okay, so here's the pilot episode of a new series that Elena Denham is doing on YouTube on a weekly basis. She calls it Star Nation News, and that's where she gives a roundup. And what makes her roundup unique is that she's giving it the perspective of what the Galactic Federation of Worlds are telling her. And as those of you that are familiar with my research know, that I believe Elena is a very credible source. She is in touch with different galactic civilizations. And so we get an account of what's happening in our solar system or on our Earth from that perspective of the Galactic Federation. So that is well worth subscribing to her channel to listen to these weekly podcasts. Okay, so here's a very interesting interview, and this involves Congressman Tim Burchett, who was interviewed by Shawn Ryan, who is a former Navy SEAL, and the interview is talking about how Congressman Tim Burchett is intent about bringing about UFO transparency in the US Congress. So it becomes very clear in the interview that Congressman Burchett is like outside of that privileged group of congressmen, typically the heads of the Intelligence Committee and the Defense Committees in the House of Representatives and the US Senate, who are given briefings, classified briefings on these technologies, and then they're sworn to secrecy. Other congressmen who are not briefed, who are not sworn to secrecy, such as Congressman Burchett, they're kept outside of that information loop. And of course, they resent it. I mean, of course, they want to know more. And he wants to bring transparency. to the UFO issue, because he believes, not only do rank and file US congressmen have a right to know about this, but also the general public has a right to know. So he's pushing aggressively to have the UFO information released into the public arena. He's trying to have hearings where these hearings present the information as far as unclassified information can be presented. So this is where there's a bit of a fine line between what can be revealed in a congressional hearing by UFO whistleblowers without them getting into trouble, while them, as opposed to them being able to talk in a public setting, in a public hearing at the US Congress, without them getting into trouble, but bringing about transparency. So that's a fine line that he's navigating, and he plans to hold another hearing in the US Congress in this year, sometime towards the end of 2023. And he is definitely wanting to bring about a UFO committee, but so far he's been unsuccessful in that. So again, you can hear more by just go to my Twitter feed, and you can watch this interview. Well worth watching. It's an hour and 20 minutes. I think it's a two-parter, and the second part has just been released. So worth listening to Congressman Burchett. Okay, so here's some important development concerning space. That is that Azerbaijan has joined China's International Research Station project. It has become the 15th signatory to join this rival to the Artemis Accords that was set up by NASA under the Trump administration. So other nations that have signed on to China's International Lunar Research Station project are Russia, South Africa, Venezuela, and Pakistan. So what we are seeing here is the formation of two rival space blocks. And the Artemis Accords, of course, have been set up by the US and NASA. Currently, there are 29 nations, and these are the most prominent spacefaring nations, aside from China and Russia, that are part of the Artemis Accords. And Germany was the latest signatory to the Artemis Accords. And so what we are seeing here is the formation of two rival space blocks who are going to be cooperating and sharing their own technologies. Now, as far as Russia and Pakistan are concerned, they still cooperate with the United States to varying levels, especially, with Pakistan, there's cooperation at a geopolitical level. And Russia cooperates with the United States as far as the International Space Station is concerned. So that would be something that would be of concern to China, about how these nations could kind of like, in a way, share the technologies that China is pioneering on this International Lunar Research Station, but it also works the other way as well. So very interesting, these two space blocks that are forming. So in 20 years from now, we'll probably see two space blocks, unless something happens to create one unified space program, which I think is the optimal choice, but it may not necessarily occur. Okay, so now this was a very interesting. There's this Israeli researcher, Stephen Ben-Nur, and who responded to the recent Hamas attacks on Israel. And he believes, based on his research, his extensive knowledge on Israel, security measures there, that this was a staged event. And he's cited various sources pointing to that. The Earl is here for you to listen to this. And for an exopolitical perspective, this is relevant because this attack by Hamas has shifted world attention onto this new war that is threatening to expand in the Middle East. And that, of course, takes away attention from this whole UFO phenomenon. I mean, in the United States, there has been quite a lot of developments concerning UAPs. Congress has been holding hearings. There's the UAP Disclosure Act for 2023. Whistleblowers are coming forward talking about reverse engineering of non-human technologies. So this new war in the Middle East that kind of like brings out deep emotions, or whether you're on the Palestinian side or whether you are on the Israeli side, it brings out strong emotions and it distracts people from what is happening out there in space to these geopolitical events on Earth. And so this is a very effective way of distracting people and taking attention away from the UFO issue or the ET disclosure issue, which can delay the momentum towards disclosure. So that's why it's important that this is addressed from an exopolitical perspective. Now, Elena Danan, she actually was kind enough to ask a commander from the Galactic Federation of Worlds, Jor-El, about this Hamas-Israel perspective and what is behind it. So, let me read out the comment from Jor-El, because I think it does bring out this exopolitical perspective on this Israel-Palestine conflict. Quote, "This conflict you are witnessing between Israel and Palestine has been from the very beginning a staged operation between two factions, both owned by the same deep state, and especially the banks." Well, that's very important because that is exactly the comment Ben-Nur was making about the staged event, that the Hamas attacks were a staged event, and he went through the information why he made that conclusion. So here you have Jor-El saying the same thing, and he's pointing to the banks, the banking cartels that are making huge profits from these two factions fighting each other, and it's easy to see where the profits come from because there's a lot of rockets, a lot of advanced technologies are used in these conflicts. A lot of money goes into the international arms trade, and the United States military-industrial complex makes a huge profit from that. So Jor-El goes on to say, this is the typical way of doing of the Enlil reptilian faction. Although Enlil and his negative faction of extraterrestrials not here anymore, they groomed well their human minions to continue the work. That is how they always proceed from the start. Their own parties that they manipulate to fight against each other like pawns on a board game. These two factions are owned by the same people, and there is an economic purpose involved, but not only. So I think this is a very important exopolitical perspective on geopolitical conflicts on Earth, that both sides are played by the deep state or by the banking cartels. Both sides, in a way, are funded to do things that create these wars that then generate enormous profits. Now, I was an actual peace researcher, and I actually did spend a couple of decades promoting international peace and conflict resolution. And the reason I left that field was because I recognized that there was some force at work fomenting these international conflicts as quick as people were able to resolve it, because there's always people of goodwill from both sides, and that especially includes the Israel-Palestine conflict. There are people from both sides that are willing to acknowledge one another, that are willing to recognize that the other side has genuine needs and security interests, and are willing to talk and negotiate. But they are always outflanked by extremists, and that is the problem. And this is how the deep state, the international bankers, the military-industrial complex are able to manipulate conflicts, because they always prop up the extremists, and the extremists always promote a military solution to a conflict. So that's the difference. So definitely, if you haven't read that message by Jor-El, then take a look at that. Okay, so let's move on to. Okay, so this is the announcement concerning the live streaming for the next Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection conference. Let me just play that for you. Now, I don't know if you probably you can't hear that, but this is where people can watch this event. If you can't attend physically, you can actually live stream this event. So I'm going to be there talking, and Elena Danan will be there. Um, there's quite a number of others, Tony Rodriguez. So well worth attending this event if you can make it. It's going to be a unique gathering of contactees from around the world and researchers that are promoting their information. Okay, so let me move on to the next story. Okay, so here we have a sorry, there we go. So here we have a story about continuing sightings and abductions in Peru. And I believe that there have also been some abductions and sightings in Brazil, in the Amazonian region adjoining Peru. So information is just starting to come out. So shots have been fired by guards in these villages that are protecting the villagers and especially the young people who have been there have been several attempts to abduct them. And what I find fascinating about this phenomenon is that all this began in June of this year when there were these joint military operations involving the US and Peru. And so that raises the question whether or not this is part of some kind of psychological operation. And I've discussed this in previous Week in Reviews, and the United States Space Force was involved and Space Command was involved in these military exercises between the Peruvian and US militaries. So it is feasible that a false flag operation is underway involving these sightings of these non-human beings floating in the Amazonian region of Peru. Okay, so here's some news I put out earlier in the week about U.S. Army Insider Missions 2, that it made the #1 bestseller list in 2 Amazon book categories. So those were both the UFO categories. So one was occult UFOs and the other one was UFOs. So U.S. Army Insider Missions #2 made the top was #1. So that's so thanks to everyone that bought that book and have supported my research in putting out the testimony of JP and others talking about what is happening behind the scenes as far as Space Command is doing in space and what different extraterrestrial groups are doing in space. So if you haven't got a copy, you can just get it from Amazon, and that helps it to stay high in these bestseller lists, and it gets the word out. So I very much appreciate people buying it and recommending it to others. And if you have bought it, definitely give it a review. Positive reviews help a lot. So thank you for those of you that have already given it a positive review. Okay, so here we have some more stories. Okay, Dr. Eric Davis. Now, he is a very interesting individual. He has been around the UFO scene for many years, over 30 years now. He was kind of like, I guess, the researcher that was best known because he was involved in these defense intelligence research documents that are called DIRD. These DIRD documents, Defense Intelligence Agency sponsors these documents that were funded through the Bigelow Aerospace Corporation due to a grant that was organized by the US Congress, in particular the US Senate under Senator Harry Reid. So that happened in the early part of I think it was around 2007. Around that period, the funding came through. And so he wrote a bunch of papers on different topics concerning extraterrestrial spacecraft, what would be involved in the propulsion systems, what kind of metallurgy would be used, what would be used in terms of navigation, energy, and so forth. So he put together a bunch of papers, and these papers were released or leaked. And so that's when he became known to many people in the general public. And what has become clear more recently is that he is now working with this corporation called the Aerospace Corporation. And so the Aerospace Corporation presumably is part of this corporate initiative to study and reverse engineer non-human technologies. And so this is part of this new narrative that has come out recently, that non-human technologies have been recovered, that different corporations are studying these, but these studies have been unsuccessful because the technologies are too advanced. Like, the example that's often given is like you give a cell phone to Benjamin Franklin or something in the 1700s, and even though Benjamin Franklin was a brilliant inventor, he would just have no clue in terms of how to operate this cell phone. The technology is just too advanced. So there's this narrative that has emerged that even though the Roswell UFO crash happened in 1947, that in the 76 years since the Roswell crash, that the recovered technologies have not been reverse engineered because they're just too advanced. So that's the narrative that is being pushed by a lot of people. Eric Davis is one of those. The Aerospace Corporation, where he works, is putting out similar information. And what I found very suspicious about the Aerospace Corporation is that that actually has been outed as the same corporation that is putting out a public disinformation campaign to discredit Elena Danaan, who, as I've mentioned, is a very credible contactee, and that they actually have a surveillance program on her. And Elena has been subjected to some assassination attempts. So this is quite serious, that companies like this and individuals associated with them are doing this kind of surveillance and discrediting. And it's like, well, is that where it stops? Where else is going? What else is going on? So there's kind of a big rabbit hole here as far as the Aerospace Corporation, Eric Davis, reverse engineering of captured extraterrestrial spacecraft, and why are they monitoring and trying to discredit legitimate contactees like Elena Danaan. Okay, so here's a roundtable discussion that came out very recently, involving a number of speakers involved in the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection conference. So there you have people that are going to be speaking. Danny Henderson, the organizer. You have Dan Willis, Elena Danaan, myself, Jean-Charles Moyen, Antonio Rodriguez, his wife, and an English medium who is going to be giving a presentation on the Friday night. So, and Karina Pataki. So, well, as I said, this is something well worth attending, and you live stream it if you cannot physically attend. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. Okay, here's a very interesting article by Seymour Hersh. And he is a very prominent journalist, investigative journalist. And he pointed out that only days before the Hamas attacks on the out of Gaza occurred, that 2 out of 3 Israeli army battalions that were guarding the border were removed, were reassigned to another location in the West Bank. So that meant that the Israeli army was only a third of its normal strength. And of course, that was a key fact that enabled enabled this Hamas faction of the Palestinian population or the political organization to attack this border region in Israel. Now, Hamas is an extremist organization in the Palestinian group, and uh, it it really did try to kind of maximize casualties because it wants to impose a military solution. And so, this undermines those, and there are many Palestinians that want to promote a diplomatic solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in the West Bank, the West Bank is governed by a faction of the Palestinian political organization that is run by the president Abbas, who does want to promote a diplomatic solution. So the effect of this attack is that at the end of the day, it strengthens extremists from both sides. Those on the Palestinian side, those on the Israeli side that want to bring about a military solution. And a conflict as old and complicated as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I mean, that, to my mind, can only be resolved diplomatically. There needs to be a peaceful diplomatic solution to this that both sides respect. And that is not going to happen if you have extremists creating a new war. And as I've already mentioned, I believe that this war that now is expanding or is on the verge of being expanded in the Middle East, sucking in other neighboring countries, is an overt attempt by the deep state to delay or even prevent disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence. And because once the extraterrestrial presence is disclosed, then we are going to witness a new world where you're going to have incredible advanced technologies being released that deal with energy, that deal with propulsion, that deal with health, that deal with metallurgy, that deal with environmental pollution. And all of that will be delayed if you have a major war, regional war taking off in Israel Palestine. And I think this is the last, well, one of the last cards that the deep state is playing to delay or even prevent disclosure from happening. I don't think they can succeed, but they are nevertheless trying. And if this conflict expands, then I think the result will be that disclosure will be delayed, and that is very unfortunate because it just pushes back the release of these advanced technologies and the incredible new world that will be released. So that's why we really have to be active. We have to be proactive and really promote peaceful resolutions to these kinds of conflicts. Okay, so here's a close up. Here's a news story about this so-called Sasquatch-like creature filmed by passengers of a Colorado train. Now, when I looked at this for the first time, I thought, well, it doesn't look like a hunter, and why would someone in costume be out there in the Colorado wilderness, walking around and being photographed by a passing train? Well, it turns out that apparently this is some kind of recreational train, and there is some kind of Sasquatch element associated with that. So it makes it possible that this could well be a person in costume that has just gone out there and is just giving a show for people to be part of this kind of like scenic train ride through this very beautiful kind of remote region of Colorado through this beautiful national park there. I think it's 2 million square acres. So yeah, that could well be just someone in a costume, or it might be the real thing. When I put out this tweet, I thought maybe this was the real thing, but more evidence is coming out that this could well be just someone in a costume. But nevertheless, Sasquatch are real, regardless of whether this is in this particular incident involves someone in a costume or not. Okay, so here we have a very interesting development. There is a video that's just come out, so you can find this video, and this is by Ross Coulhart, a prominent Australian journalist, and what he's learned from his interviews of various whistleblowers is that now he's learned that you need to be a particular type of person to operate this technology using your brain and your consciousness. So this is from a video that has just been released. So you can find it by going to this link to this story and clicking the links there. So why is this important? Because this is precisely the topic that I'm going to be addressing at my upcoming presentation at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection. I'm going to be looking at this nexus between ancient space technologies or ancient spacecraft, which I call space arcs, consciousness, and star groups, because these ancient spacecraft, they have pods on them, and these pods, or crypts or sarcophagi if you like, they have bodies of the crew, and the crew have incarnated on Earth. So this makes a fascinating kind of development as far as ancient spacecraft are concerned, that it's not necessarily extraterrestrials that are part of these craft, and it's not necessarily that the crew are time travelers, nor that these are interdimensionals. It may be that the crew are star seeds or star groups that have incarnated on the Earth to help awaken humanity to the reality of our galactic brethren, that we are part of a galactic civilization. So one of the characteristics of these people is that they are able to access the crews of these craft. So I've spoken and interviewed people like JP, Elena Denan, Jean-Charles Moyen, who have been able to access these craft. And so there's a connection, either them just having the right consciousness or DNA to access the craft, or being associated in some way with the crew of those craft. So this seems to be one of those elements of the UFO issue which is going to be coming out. And that's going to be very exciting because we're going to learn that many of us, and some of you watching this week in review, may well be the crew of these space arcs, or you may have some connection to a star group or an extraterrestrial civilization that enables you or gives you access to these space arcs, because these space arcs or these ancient spacecraft that are buried, and of course many of the probes that are now coming out, these are associated with different extraterrestrial civilizations. So the starseeds from those civilizations have access. So a Pleiadian will have access to a spacecraft, an ancient spacecraft that was built and designed for the Pleiadian consciousness. Because, I mean, this is the difference between our level of technology today. I mean, today, if you own a car, for example, you need a key to open the car, start it up, and drive it. And that key is your kind of like signature, or your way of being able to show that that car belongs to you. But it's just a key, it's an instrument. Well, these ancient spacecraft, they respond to the DNA and the consciousness of the designers or of the owners. So these craft will only respond to a person carrying the right DNA and consciousness. Otherwise, they will lay dormant. And they can lie dormant for centuries, thousands of years, because the crew or the owner of that spacecraft is in the reincarnational cycle. And so when a time comes, such as now, when there is this awakening and people start remembering who they are, the crew of these craft wake up. They remember who they are and they get guided to these different places. And because they have the right DNA and consciousness, they gain access to that ancient technology. So it is a fascinating topic. It is something that I'll be talking about in my conference presentation. I talk about it also in US Army Insider Missions, both books 1 and 2, in terms of JP and some others like Jean-Charles Moyen and Elena Danam having access to these space arcs and to these advanced technologies because of their DNA and consciousness. So very important topic. So yeah, people definitely have the right consciousness and brainwaves. They can access this ancient ET technology. And one more individual that I mentioned in my tweet is Stephen Chua. This was someone who Elena Danam interviewed, and he had the correct brainwaves to be able to safely interact with extraterrestrial technologies. He had an abundance of gamma brainwave activity, and that is something Jean-Charles Moyen also possessed in abundance that gave him access to these advanced technologies. So as far as what area of the brain is able to help people gain access to these technologies, it's that area of the brain responsible for the generation of gamma brain waves. And that is not something that can be stimulated by pharmaceutical products, because what's very interesting is that Stephen Chua said that when he was taken to Area 51 in 1980, in the early 1980s, to work on an F-15E, F-15F. E was the last of the conventional F-15s that were modified. F-15F was a specially modified F-15 that incorporated fly-by-thought technology that was reverse engineered from extraterrestrials. So that was an extraterrestrial technology, and the pilots that interfaced with that fly-by-thought technology had to have their gamma brainwave stimulated. And the medical doctors came up with a pharmaceutical product to do that. And as a consequence, they suffered severe brain trauma. And the project eventually was abandoned. But before they abandoned the project, they got Stephen Chua to come from Singapore, which he was working with the Singaporean Prime Minister at the time, Lee Kuan Yew, who was part of a special unit. He was flown to Area 51, and he helped out for a few weeks there for them to work out whether it was possible for this kind of like fly-by-thought technology to be safely flown. And what they discovered was that Stephen Chua could do it safely, but he had an abundance of gamma brainwave activity that allowed him to do it safely, and that unless you had that kind of natural gamma brainwave activity, you couldn't do it safely, so they abandoned the project. So that is more confirmation that yes, it is absolutely correct that one needs the correct DNA and consciousness and brainwave activity to be able to access extraterrestrial technologies. So that's it for this week in review. Thank you for subscribing. Again, just go to Michael's twitter.com/Michael Salla to be able to access all of the stories that I mentioned. And I look forward to doing this again with you next week. Thank you and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.